Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and a huge welcome. My name's Andrew Morris. I'm a doctor, and I'm also Director of Health Data Research UK, and it's a great pleasure and privilege to welcome you to the launch of the International COVID-19 Data Research Alliance and Workbench. And can I thank you all for carving time out of frenetic diaries to join us in what we hope will be an important and exciting 90 minutes where we discuss and learn how to craft an international alliance and workbench which makes an important contribution in our quest to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm delighted to say we've got over 200 people joining the call today from over 26 countries, including India, Kenya, South Africa, China, Finland, Thailand, Australia, New Zealand, Philippines, and Malawi. So it is a truly international webinar, and fingers crossed that the technology works. So that's what we hope. I should say that the session is being recorded, so it will be available by Friday for general dissemination. And we want this to be as interactive as possible. So please do use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen, rather than the chat. And we will protect as much time for discussion as possible at the end, as we shape and craft this international endeavor. So to set the scene, welcome, and I've inserted the word welcome in the 10 most commonly spoken languages in the world. Now, Steve, who you're just about to meet, claims that he speaks all 10 of those languages, so we'll need to put him through his paces. But it is so important that this is an international endeavor whereby we learn from each other, because it's 191 days precisely since the WHO China office was informed of a novel coronavirus infection in a seafood market in Wuhan. As of today, the 8th of July, there are 11.7 million cases globally in 188 countries and territories, and it's been responsible for 543,000 deaths as a minimum. So it is wreaking havoc across the world. And I think that COVID-19 has really exemplified the urgent need for open science, collaboration, and data access in a trustworthy way that spans international sovereign territories. And that's really at the essence of what today's webinar is about. How can we work in partnership to harness data to inform discoveries that inform people's lives? Because it's striking, not really about what we know about COVID-19, but really what we don't know about it. And data will be absolutely crucial in our quest to understand the immunology, the transmission. How can we harness genomics? And most importantly, the role of therapeutics and clinical trials to combat this pandemic. To do that, we need not only good data sources, but the ability to integrate data sources at scale. So I think that COVID has been a wake-up call, that it is time to work in partnership to think through how do we share best practice, enable data access in a trustworthy way. So on the next slide, what we hope to do today is discuss why an international alliance, the key concept of partnership working, how do we listen, how do we learn across sovereign boundaries, and the principles of that. Key to this, I think, is trust. And to be trustworthy, one needs to be honest, reliable, and competent. So how do we weave trust into everything we do with transparency and respect? Our suggested approach is to be research question led to shape the alliance and shape the tools that we co-create and make available in the spirit of open science. But most importantly, how do we listen and learn from you and shape how people can get involved, actively participate, so that we work in partnership to address the COVID-19 pandemic, unleashing the power of data in a trustworthy and fair way. So lots of time for Q&A. So it's now my great pleasure to invite Steve Kern from the Gates Foundation to outline why he picked the phone up to us 8 weeks ago and the essence of the International Alliance. So Steve.
Great, thank you, Andrew, and good morning, good evening, good day to everyone. I won't repeat that in the number of foreign languages there because that'll not sound very effective from me. So can we go to the next slide, please? So as we're all aware, the COVID-19 challenge is just an unprecedented effort that we're all struggling with, and it's a global effort, not just a locally or focal effort. And because of that globalness, and the global presence, it creates this urgent need to be able to work in collaboration as an international group. And so the international component is strongly what Andrew has emphasized, and I'd like to reiterate that. I'm representing not just the Gates Foundation, but a group of funders who have come together in what they're calling the therapeutic accelerator to try to come up with rapid solutions of therapeutics that are matching the ongoing collaborative efforts in vaccines and diagnostics throughout the world to help address this problem. And one of the challenges, as we've all seen, is that there's been a tremendous enthusiasm and an unprecedented response in the research world to try to work on solving problems related to COVID. But what we're also finding is that it's challenging to do as isolated individual groups. And so bringing people together, the workspace for collaboration, that actually provides the opportunity for them to learn from each other, to collaborate in analyses, in understanding questions that are important across the globe to help address this pandemic is actually one of the biggest problems I think that we're facing. And importantly, we want to build something with this effort that actually outlasts this current crisis that we're dealing with, because it's not unreasonable to think that we will face these kinds of challenges as a global international community again and again in the future. And so being able to build on this collaboration and then use that as a means for a more rapid response in any subsequent challenge is one of the outcomes that we hope will come forward. I think we have to go back 2 more slides. Okay, now forward 1, thank you. So there are a number of key challenges related to COVID-19, even at this stage of being the number of days that we are into this. They're outlined here in the box, and many of them you're aware of. But I think one of the biggest issues that we're struggling with is the fragmentation of data. This is not a unique problem to COVID-19. It's actually been a challenge that researchers have faced as we've all had the capability to collect data in our own areas to address the problem. How do we bring that data together to gain more value, more use from it, learning from each other's experiments? That fragmentation into what I call the isolated archipelagos of data really limit our ability to be cohesive in our response. And so what we need to do is create a research environment that's going to provide the shared access to the data sets in a collaborative way and have analytical tools which we can use to work together to help address the questions that my colleague Naveen will talk about later on in the presentation. Importantly is the idea that this is done in a manner that facilitates and enables trust. It's really critical that people feel that their data that they've worked hard to collect or the data that comes from sovereign entities is used in a respectful and appropriate way along the guidelines for which it was intended and for which it was collected. And so that's a key component to this effort as we move forward, is to make sure that we can build that trust and enable you all who are listening to feel trusted to participate in this collaboration. If I could go to the next slide. So this alliance will oversee, as we said, a trusted research environment. You'll hear that word a lot. I think we can't really overemphasize the key there. One of the things that I've found in working and trying to bring together data alliances internationally is that the technology solutions are actually quite available and quite readily addressable to our problems of being able to link disparate pieces of data. The biggest problem that gets in the way oftentimes is trustedness, that the collaborators can work together in an effective way. So we've chosen Health Data Research UK to help lead this effort because they have a proven track record of doing this kind of work across the UK public health data system in projects already. And so we want to build on that record of delivery and trust and keep this capability for ensuring that researchers feel that they can engage effectively, safely, and importantly in a way that supports reciprocity between the data providers and the analysts. Too often we hear of people concerned about their data being used by others to gain insights without appropriate attribution or even consideration of the insight from which the data was collected. That's an issue we want to make sure that this workbench facilitates the challenge too, so that those who collect the data are equally at the table with those who are analyzing the data and can actually help inform that the analysis are done properly, that they're representing the intention and the insight that was gained from the data, because oftentimes that can be lost. So why are funders interested in this? Well, funders are making investments to help enable solutions to come forward for this crisis. And partly what we're hoping to be able to do is gain greater insight from working together and building on each other's investments. So this alliance and the workbench that's supporting it is being funded by a number of philanthropic organizations from across the globe. And I'd like to take just a quick second to invite one of my colleagues, Steve Burnell from the Minderoo Foundation in Australia, to say a word or two about Minderoo's interest in this collaboration as a funder and why this is an important effort to them.
Thank you, Steve and Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here from Perth, Australia. Minderoo Foundation was established by Andrew and Nicola Forrest, and with a mission to arrest unfairness and create opportunities to better the world. So we have a number of initiatives that span modern slavery, ending ocean pollution, childhood education. We have a big initiative that I lead around collaboration in cancer care, and that involves a lot of focus on how do we use data more effectively in cancer research and the provision of care. And so in COVID specifically, we mounted quite a large response, certainly in the Australian context. That has been a big focus for us in Australia, along with our bushfire response earlier. It's been a very difficult period. And one of the things we've done is focus on research, obviously, and clinical trials. We've also done a lot in community services, and we've done a lot as well in securing personal protective equipment and testing equipment. But specifically, I think one of our biggest focus internationally within COVID has been partnering with Bill and Melinda Gates and the Wellcome Trust in this data alliance. And that was very deliberate. We looked for a number of clinical trials. We looked for a number of research opportunities. And there's this underlying sort of tenet of everything we do around equality and around collaboration and around open access to data and information, whether that's information about fishing in the high seas, information about that is about indentured work, or in this case, very urgently, information around COVID and this disease. And so it wasn't hard for us to understand the context of this. We were very impressed by the partners involved on the funding side, and then obviously with HDR UK as a trusted sort of convener of this network. It seemed highly appropriate to support this, and it's already been said, and I don't want to repeat it, but really unlocking this data and making it available both from all corners of the world, but more importantly to all corners of the world for the best sort of analytics and collaborative thought to draw insights is what we're all about, and is what is going to be needed to defeat this disease. So Mindra is very proud to be involved, glad to be a sponsor, and very much looking forward to what this this Data Alliance and this workbench and these technologies, but more importantly, this collaboration can do to really help fight this pandemic, and hopefully really set us up in a way to be able to handle future pandemics in a global sense much more effectively. So thank you, Steve.
Great. Thanks, Steve. I appreciate the comments, and we appreciate the support of the Minderoo Foundation and the other foundations that have been involved in this effort. It's really a global response of funders to help engage the community. And I think Steve really picked on a key word there of equality that's been a key component of Minderoo's investment portfolio. One of the things that we want to make sure that people come away from this presentation is this idea that we are creating an alliance, so a community, and a workbench, a facilitative space. What we aren't creating is a mega repository. So we're not trying to collect all the data and bring it all together into one place. We want to be able to work with the data as much as keeping it where it's located, but enable researchers to bring their data together in a collaborative way to help answer questions that then can go forward and direct our response. So with that, I'll turn it back over to my colleague, Andrew, who will give us an introduction to HDR UK and their work.
Yes, thanks, Steve, and thanks, Steve. So very briefly, it's a privilege to be invited to convene this international alliance, and it builds on some work that we've been doing in the UK for the last 2 to 3 years. And we certainly don't have all the answers, but the approach that we have taken is to develop and maintain the integrity of a trustworthy health data research ecosystem. And our mission in the UK is to unite the UK's health data to enable research and discoveries that improve the lives of 66 million people. Most importantly, we do not want to control data. That's not our job, but it's to think through the policies, the tools, the standards, the governance, the public engagement that enable collaboration and interoperability, which I define as the ability to work across organizational boundaries with no additional effort. So how do we enable that? And we're certainly still in the foothills of where we need to be, but some success in the UK. For example, there's a health data research gateway in the UK where anyone in the world can search 450 data sets from over 30 data controllers to discover data, to see what's available, to enable collaborative research. So next slide, please. So our vision for the International Alliance is to unite data from international clinical trials, healthcare systems, biomedical data to enable discoveries that benefit all people everywhere by reducing the harm of the COVID-19 pandemic. With a focus not only on therapeutics, but understanding key features of the natural course of the disease, susceptibility, heterogeneity in clinical outcome, predictors of clinical outcome. And to do that, how do we build a trustworthy international partnership to enable a rapid response to the current COVID-19 pandemic? People tell us, data scientists, that they spend 80–90% of their time accessing data, wrangling data, and only 10% of their time analyzing data. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could flip that equation to enable analysis at scale? Next slide, please. So in the last 8 to 10 weeks, we've developed a broad and global alliance, which we hope will gain momentum and grow in a very iterative, agile, and open way. We touched upon our funders that include Gates Foundation, Minderoo, Wellcome, and many others. We have international alliance partners from around the globe, including the African Academy of Sciences. I had a wonderful call with Moses and Kabura earlier this week, telling me about the Grand Challenge Africa program, but also existing data repositories. For example, Aziz Sheikh, who's on the call, leads the Breathe data research hub in the UK with over 100 respiratory related data sets that is collaborative, open and willing and enthusiastic to work in partnership. And we've got a great cohort of technology and data science partners from across academia, for example, the secure research platform in the UK, to commercial, whether that's Microsoft or Iridia. Next slide, please. And here are a few quotes from our partners. From Tariq Kokar on the right side of the slide, head of data science at the Wellcome. Again, identifying the need to access data in the fair way. And also a quote from ICODA, which we will learn a lot from, Philippe Guren, who have pioneered collaborative data sharing, but see the opportunity to work in partnership to gear up to a new level. Next slide, please. So our alliance will learn, we will work in partnership, and most importantly, we will promote and facilitate open research, sharing in the open data analysis methods, tools, and results. Next slide, please. And to do that, we will often root back to our principles, our values, which need to be woven into everything we do in terms of equity, responsible data sharing, transparency, a proportionate approach to governance, embracing the 5 safes approach, but an absolute commitment to inclusivity, collaboration, and moving at pace. However, the strapline is important, trustworthiness in everything we do. And on that point, I would now like to hand over to Nicola, who was former head of policy at Wellcome, to talk through our approach to trust. So Nicola.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Can I have the next slide, please? So I'm going to tell you a bit about what we're actually doing and then how we're hoping to be able to do it in a trustworthy way. And really, the Alliance and Workbench, as you've heard already, is going to help to do 3 things: discover data, access data, and analyze data. You'll be hearing a bit more of this and each of those different aspects over the course of this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are. And we have a video demonstration coming up. So I'm not going to go into them in detail, but just to give you that sort of overview. First of all, improving the discoverability of data. We want researchers to be able to search for the relevant data sets for their questions from anywhere in the world. Then accessing data. We know this is always one of the slowest parts, it's one of the biggest barriers. So what can we do to help streamline the process, having a single mechanism to request access from multiple different data sets? And then when that data use has been approved, the analysis of the data using a range of tools within the safe setting of the workbench and allowing teams to work together collaboratively. But those 3 things will only be possible if we have very robust governance, and particularly taking an approach that allows data custodians to retain control, as Andrew's mentioned. So the Alliance is going to be enabling and supporting access, but the data custodians can still use their own decision-making processes, their own approvals processes. And most importantly, they don't even need to transfer the data can stay local. So the workbench will allow federated analysis. The questions are sent to the data rather than the data being sent to the researcher and their question. And again, you'll be hearing more about the federated compute that makes that possible. So data custodians will be given a menu of options and some choice, but within a flexible framework. And that framework is really important. We can't just sort of invent on a case-by-case basis and expect this to be streamlined and fast. So there will be a menu of options, and that framework will be based on, can I move on to the next slide, please? That framework will be based on the 5 safes. So the 5 safes, if you're not familiar with it as a framework, has been developed originally by the UK Office of National Statistics, but it's beginning to be adopted in other countries now as well. And also, really importantly, it's very well received and has a lot of traction with the public and patient groups where it's been discussed. A recent Citizen Summit deliberative event in London was very happy with the use of health data provided these 5 safes were followed. So what are the 5 safes? First of all, safe people. So we'll make sure that there's an approval process to authorize researchers before they can use the data. It'll be a light touch, streamlined process, but there does need to be some kind of approval. Secondly, the projects, safe projects. There needs to be a review of the research proposals to make sure that they're for public benefit and acceptable use of the data. Most importantly, perhaps for what we're talking about today, data must only be accessed in a safe setting. And this is the trusted research environment that you've heard so much about already, either within the workbench itself or the local trusted environment, provided it's safe and secure and with the right auditing processes. The data itself must be safe data. We have to minimize the risk of identification. Data will be de-identified before use. And finally, safe outputs, ensuring that there's minimal risk of disclosure with anything that leaves the safe setting. So vetting results before they leave to ensure that there wouldn't be identification. And can I go on to the next slide again, please? Even with the most robust governance, we'll only really be able to build a trustworthy system if we have public and patients on board. And it's great to see questions already coming in about the importance of public and patient involvement, because that really has to be central to all of this. Oh, sorry, can we head back? Clearly, there are a range of approaches for engagement. Everything from at one end of the spectrum, awareness raising, providing information, through to consultation, deliberation, and finally to involving public in decision making and the sort of process of co-creation. We want to use a range of approaches. We want to work with patients and public. HDR UK already has a patient advisory group focusing specifically on COVID-19, and clearly we'll be working with them and learning from them. But that in itself probably isn't enough. And I think there are 2 real challenges that we face in getting this right. The first is the urgency of COVID, the pandemic situation. And I think there's been a tendency to overlook public involvement in the rush to get the answers as quickly as possible, or to assume that the public are a bit more trusting, will take a slightly more lenient approach to use of data in a pandemic situation, or that it's too difficult when you can't talk to people face to face. How do you even begin to have these conversations? I don't think any of that is appropriate for us to think in this context. We can't assume that the public think this is the right thing to be doing with their data. And because this is really for the long term, we need to get the right foundation. So it's crucial to us to be involving public and patients right from the beginning. The second really big challenge, and perhaps even bigger than that urgency, is how to do this internationally. There's a massive difference between what public involvement looks like in part of London compared to what community engagement will look like in a village in Kenya. They're just totally different conversations and totally different approaches. And it's really important that we respect that and that we try to adopt appropriate approaches in different places. We recognise that's not going to be easy at all, and we're looking to all of you and to our partners for help and advice and to how we could do that most effectively, and learning and adapting as we go. There's a quote on your screen at the moment from a community engagement workshop in Senegal. We'll need to iterate it. It will take time, but we need to do it in a very inclusive way that really helps people feel involved and that we are building this in a trustworthy way. And I think the key watchword in ensuring that is transparency in everything that we do. Say what we want to do, how we're doing it, and then also being transparent in what we actually are doing, how decisions are made, and the results that are coming out, making sure everything is clear and accessible and transparent if we're to build a trustworthy system. Once we've got that trustworthy system and that trustworthy approach, we can then hopefully really tackle the key research questions. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Naveen, who is going to take you through some of those priorities.
Thank you, Nicola. And again, as the others have stated, a great pleasure to be part of the group tackling this important challenge for us all worldwide. So by now you have heard about the level of ambition of the initiative, and you have heard how careful and thoughtful we are being in proceeding with this. You're getting a sense of the inclusivity and inclusiveness that we strive for, and that involves all of you. Now, for those of you who have already been involved in initiatives of this kind, you know that it's tremendously complex. And so we need an anchor that helps us to decide what we tackle first. And for us, that anchor is, what are the questions that matter to the community that we serve? This helps us to prioritize and focus our efforts as we seek data sources and we refine the toolkit of analytics available to us. So if I were to ask the community at large for what's on your mind, I would be able to populate a spreadsheet with many thousands of rows. And that's a difficult thing to then be able to turn into concrete action. So what we've done, if we click, is we've created some categories. These are the categories you'd expect to see. They talk about the disease itself, its spread, the population, vaccines and other methods of prophylaxis, the diagnostic tests that we have available to us, the treatments to alter the course of the disease, and then the outcomes in the population and any residual unmet need. You have all already fed some questions to us, and we have mapped those questions against these categories. Let's click once more. And what we see from this, without the eye test of reading through every single piece, is that right now in the community with you and with other stakeholders, there's an incredible amount of emphasis on treatments. What do we know about them in terms of safety, efficacy, the subgroups in which they are most impactful? When do I administer them? How quickly might they work? What sorts of clinical outcomes can I expect? That's a whole area of focus, and it gives us our marching orders and our priorities. The next two, in terms of the level of interest at the moment, are around vaccines and prophylaxis, for which data is yet to emerge, and so that's coming a little later on. And then, as was mentioned, I think we even saw some of this in the Q&A, there are actual questions that are very contemporary and on all of our minds regarding transmission patterns, other elements of disease manifestation, risk stratification across different segments of the population. And so that second category is our second priority. So let's go on to the next slide. If we were to develop the all-time best, perfect alliance and workbench, it would take us an awfully long time. There are lots and lots and lots of details and complexities. So what we've chosen to do is to have our cake and eat it too. We're coming out, and you're going to see in a moment very concretely what the workbench looks like. And you've heard from Nicola around governance and the systems and processes we're putting in place. We're going to take that basic first version of it, pressure test it with the priority questions that matter. So we're going to do two things for you very quickly. The first is we're going to start generating evidence around those research questions. The first being holistic, complete evaluation of what we know regarding efficacy and safety of treatments. The second one being, let's identify, well, first let's understand the disease more, and from there identify the opportunities for intervening and curbing that flow of disease consequences. While we do that, we test ourselves. We test our tools, we test our governance, we test our processes, we get feedback from all of you as collaborators and contributors of data to tell us where to make it smoother, more seamless, or maybe we need to be more careful in certain instances. So it's a learn as you go, but starting from a very solid foundation. In the next slide, and the last of my slides, I want to give you a flavor of what is involved with that first, what we call a driver project, that first area of research questions, which is our priority. So I'm going to start at the bottom of the slide and let you know that we already have commitment from a dozen pharmaceutical sponsors who are running or have run randomized controlled trials investigating opportunities for drug treatment, so drug treatment candidates. They have committed to providing data from their trials in summary form. Now, what's the summary form means? It means that they're going to provide us for the entire trial population and also for certain subgroups of interest that we are defining right now, the results in aggregate. So there's no individual patient level data. And by the same token, there's a little less richness to the data, but there's also a certain ease and directness in terms of being able to use this without the risk of re-identifying any one patient. This is a companion and complementary to the Transcelerate initiative that some of you are aware of, where they will have a little later on individual patient level data that allows for a lot deeper investigation of some of the research questions that we have. But this one is quicker and it is informative. I should point out that beyond these pharmaceutical companies, we're already hearing from other organizations that want to work with us and provide their data as well. So that's the data commitment. Now, even to make something this focused work, we need to have certain kind of operational aspects sorted out. The first piece is, well, let's find out where all these randomized controlled trials are, what drugs, what treatment arms, who's conducting them, when are they reading out interim final results, etc. And then we need what I've called here data dictionary. This tells us which endpoints, which are the subgroups, how will they be dichotomized? And that in of itself, this data model lives as a deliverable that can be used by others who might be looking at summary level data work in their own data sources, be it real world evidence, observational cohorts, or whatnot. So that's the first deliverable. The second deliverable for those of you who want to work with the data and provide your research questions and gain accreditation, you can come right into the workbench and we will provide you some standard tools. So right away, with the data in a harmonized dictionary, you're able to look at the trials, understand what they are, what they study, the populations. You're able to just look at visuals and distribution curves of the endpoints themselves. And then we're going to provide you some statistical tools. And the first of those will be standard traditional meta-analysis tools. So you don't have to bring your own, though you can, and you can move very quickly through that knowledge curve and inform yourselves as to the results. And eventually, we are studying the possibility of providing network meta-analysis, which now can aggregate information across multiple trials in which some subset of regimens are being assessed. Now, because not all the data in the world of randomized controlled trials will be accessible to the workbench, we're providing a companion tool. And that tool is a pipe-in of digitized information from publications of trials. And so researchers in the workbench can see very quickly how the data accessible through the workbench compares to the publications. And you'll have a sense of how complete your assessment is using data from the workbench. And then if you have questions that cannot be addressed with what I've just described in terms of the toolkit, you're able to request bespoke, crafted, aggregated data sets upon which you can bring your own modeling tools and or look to aggregate them with other data sets to do your work. So this is the first of the driver projects. I've mentioned a second one, which is around understanding the disease state. This will involve other data sources, we'll have other analytical techniques, other deliverables, and it's just about a month behind this first one. So we're coming from scope and ambition all the way through to getting a more concrete around the assets that you'll have to do your work. And I'm going to turn it over to David Sibbald and his team, who have done a very impressive amount of work to create a platform. And you'll see that this platform is real. And I hope that you'll be as impressed with it as we all were when we signed up. So David, over to you.
Great, thanks Naveen. Hello everybody, we've bounced back over to Scotland here. So I'm David Sibbald, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Iridia Informatics. So we're building and providing many of the data sharing and data science platform services for the workbench. So rather than tempt fate and do a live demo on this webinar, we've sort of pulled together a kind of 5-minute video that does two things. It sort of captures the principles of the workbench, sort of aligned to the principles that that Andrew and Steve ran through for the Alliance, and gives you a little bit of a taster on some of the sort of approaches and some of the functionality that's available. So I hope you enjoy that 5-minute video, and happy to take questions on this at the end. Thanks.
The previous speakers have presented the mission and purpose of the Alliance. We'd now like to take the opportunity to present some of the principles behind the workbench. The workbench exists as a platform to support the mission of the Alliance and the diverse data management and data science needs of the individual driver projects. COVID-19 presents an enormous societal and health challenge affecting every corner of the world. Open science is at the heart of how the Alliance is responding to this challenge, and the workbench is following those principles from a technology and service perspective. COVID-19 is a new disease, and relatively speaking, we know little about it. To help us accelerate understanding and reduce the time for driver project outcomes, the workbench adopts an ecosystem approach. What do we mean by that? We want to enable people to form dedicated teams, bring data, code, expertise, and have freedom to operate within the domain of their driver project, and do this while ensuring appropriate use and governance of the data contributed to a project. The workbench adopts GDPR as a default governance framework, and all transactions on data through a project lifecycle are audited in real time. Key to the success of the Alliance is the effective sharing of data, metadata, results, and methods. The workbench accommodates multiple approaches to establishing trusted data sharing, allowing data contributors to share their data in a centralized, distributed, or federated model. The framework for data sharing is built on the work of the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health and available in GitHub as an open source project. The data sharing approach is the decision of the data controller, driven by their governance requirements and the technical infrastructure they have available. We know driver projects will be very diverse. The planned outcomes, the mix of data, the governance arrangements for the data, and the requirements for the science team. The workbench provides function and flexibility in two key areas: discovering data and working with data. This short video gives you a look at a small subset of workbench functionality covering a few key points important for most users. How to discover what data is available, how to quickly explore that data or metadata within a secure private workspace, looking at the freedom to bring your own tools and code to your driver project, and how to build quick interactive apps based on your data and methods. And finally, looking at the governance workflow through the workspace. Let's have a look. Through the lens of a science team starting a driver project, one of the earliest questions is what data is available and will be useful for my project. We want to provide a good search and metadata analysis experience at the front end of a project to allow the team to make an early decision as to whether they pursue a data access request. We know data access can take time, so let's make sure what's available is worth pursuing. Assuming it is, we're working to establish an automated data selection and sharing workflow that can operate either standalone within the workbench or can integrate with the systems of choice at the source of the data. Our goal is the same as search and metadata analysis. How do we make the process efficient, transparent, and audited? Once data is authorized as available and accessible either locally or through the distributed or federated data sharing framework mentioned earlier, our driver project team can start working with the data through a workspace. A workspace is a safe, secure sandbox where curated data relevant to the driver project is made available and team members invited by the project lead. Driver project users can explore the data and run a range of biomedical stats functions. These packages are written in R, and code is available to further develop within the workspace, publish, and reuse. For users with more specialist requirements, virtual machines can be provisioned, allowing scripts, codes, analysis, pipelines, and other licensed tools to be brought within the secure boundary of the workspace. At all times, we're adhering to the open science principles of the Alliance, the use of open source software, and GDPR as the framework for governance. We want to make it easy for driver project users to share their results with a wide cross-section of stakeholders. Our Shiny apps are an embedded feature within the workspace, allowing templated analysis apps to be quickly constructed. Driver project users can take their data, methods, and results and build interactive visualizations very quickly from a range of our Shiny templates provided. Here's an example of a survival analysis app built from synthetic data derived from the recent remdesivir study. Results can be exported from the workspace through an airlock facility requiring authorization from the driver project lead. All transactions through the life cycle of a driver project are captured and made available to project stakeholders. Workbench services are underpinned by Microsoft Azure PaaS services, allowing individual projects to specify their compute, storage, and specialist services on demand. Our objective is to build an ecosystem of participants that can contribute data, code, expertise, and analysis methods to efficiently tackle the breadth of questions surrounding COVID-19. We want to encourage open collaboration and an environment that encourages adaptive analysis, building on previous results. We want to build this on a strong foundation of production quality services backed by a robust cloud infrastructure and information governance process.
Okay, now I'd like to introduce Julia, who's just going to spend the last 2 to 3 members introducing the Alliance, how to get involved, but also how we shape this for the benefit of Alliance members. So Julia, welcome.
Thank you. I think you heard a lot from Nicola about the fact that engagement and involvement of the broad community is a critical pillar of our activities. And I think it's safe to say that that's going to be one of my top priorities as we move forward to establishing the Alliance over the coming weeks. So what I'm keen to do as part of today's discussion, but also a lot of other dialogue that we're initiating now, is really to determine the most effective ways of achieving that engagement with every aspect of the community, to learn the lessons from other successful initiatives and to develop some of our own best practices as we go through. So that's really what the key message of this slide is. If we can move on to the next slide. I think very specifically, there are 2 types of partners when we talk about the Alliance partners that we're focusing on. The first is the data partners, those who will be contributing data, but it's more than just a kind of a passive handing over of data. It's actually still a very active role, because the people who do contribute their data will retain control over how that data is used and accessed. So helping us by making the data discoverable through development of metadata, helping us by actually authorizing the requests as they come through so that you have the control, but also are enabling others to be able to use it, to follow through on the commitment that we're showing in terms of transparency, but also to help with the community to improve and make easier to share going forward through the harmonization of standards, and ultimately, obviously, to actually conduct analyses and research within the workbench that you've just seen presented. Moving beyond data, there are also other types of partnerships that we're keen to establish, whether it's helping with some of the technical challenges that we're going to be facing, identifying the research questions, and we've already seen that journey starting with the research questions we asked you to contribute, helping inform and shape the governance as we've just identified, really supporting the public engagement. We are and are committed to being truly international and truly global in our outreach. That involves a level of resourcing and connectivity at different levels and different geographies. So working out how to do that successfully is going to be extremely important. And again, helping with the analyses on the workbench. So if we move forward to the next slide. You heard Naveen talk about this concept of driver projects and the analyses. even for current driver projects that we've already identified, we want to bring in and we want to involve the community, because it is only by doing that that it will actually be relevant for everyone and we'll maximize the impact. Going forward, I think just in the research question that we asked as part of the registration for today, we've already received more than 40 ideas for other types of research inquiries that people think are important. We will be putting in place a scientific advisory committee that will help us with prioritizing those and working out how we ensure that the infrastructure we are putting in place is fit for purpose, so that ultimately this becomes a platform that can be effective and useful for all the research questions around COVID and health that are going to be arising, have already arisen and will continue to arise. So please keep coming to us with your research questions to help ensure that the platform that we are developing is truly fit for purpose. Next slide, please. So here are some of the priorities we wanted to flag for the next 3-4 months. Today is our launch event. Things have already started moving forward, but we'll be picking up momentum dramatically over the coming weeks. The engagement process, as you saw, with some of the people who've already signed up as partners, has already been initiated. But again, we see that ramping up quite significantly, and today's event is a first step in that process. We are committed to establishing our governance structures very quickly, but part of why they aren't all perfectly in place yet is because we want to do it in a consultative way and get your input and feedback on how best to do that. We've already got data sets identified that we want to start bringing on board. That's something that will be starting within the next few weeks, and then again ramping up over the coming months. In order to get this collaborative approach really part of our DNA, we will be setting up workshops starting next month to engage different stakeholders and get input and guidance to help frame our work. The driver projects, which are already becoming a reality, as Naveen described, are going to, again, we'll be moving forward and we'll be starting to see the outputs of that after the summer. And we're looking to set up our first symposium, so our first chance to really convene formally as a group come October. So a lot of activity there, and there's many things underpinning that are going to have to come together, but it's a very exciting time. So with that, I think I will hand back to Andrew.
Terrific. Thank you, Julia. So thank you. Next slide, please. Oh, Q&A. Great. And I'm glad to see we've got some questions flowing in as well. So can I thank everyone, because when you registered, you were very enthusiastic around suggesting projects, questions, etc. We have a few here which we may come back to, but I was keen to go to the Q&A on the Zoom call, and maybe just ask a few colleagues to answer some of the questions that have come in, and we've got about 20 already, so that's fantastic. So we're going to start with public engagement. So Nicola, I'll ask you to address this one. Do you see public engagement manifesting through study designs, interpreting results, or implementing implications of findings? That's a question from Gracella.
I think we want to see public engagement throughout many different aspects of the Alliance and the Workbench. One of the things I think there will be a particular role for it in is helping to shape the governance, designing the processes so that they're trustworthy, and also then being involved in the review processes. Are the research questions and research proposals using the data acceptable? Are they in the public interest? But I think also the other piece we really need public engagement in right from the beginning is helping to answer that very question. How should we best be using public, patients, communities, and what should it look like in different places?
Okay, thank you for that. And if colleagues want to come back, if any of our colleagues don't answer the question as sharply as you'd like, please do come back on the Q&A. So here's a good question, because there are many initiatives with similar aims. So working through the partnership, working with this is important. So I'll maybe ask this of either Steve or Naveen. Is there any coordination done with Transcelerate, as they are also working on creating a database of COVID-19 data? And when you answer, maybe just for folk, explain what Transcelerate is. So either Naveen or Steve?
Naveen, why don't you take that one on Transcelerate, and then I'll follow up with a broader comment around that.
Great, so thank you. And yes, I mentioned, but I'll say a little bit more about Transcelerate. So Transcelerate, for those of you who don't know, is an organization that has been in existence now for something like 10 years. It brings together the research and development function of a number of pharmaceutical companies, and they tackle big, important challenges that affect their ability to make R&D more efficient and effective for all of us to benefit from new medicines. They have announced that they will have patient-level data available in their repository from a number of their members. This may include control arm data and also the test candidate data. We actually work with them quite closely. What we know is that our efforts and theirs are complementary in that it will take them a little while longer to get patient-level data reflected in a way that's fully de-identified, and they have their own rules and conditions around access to the data. We will probably be able to get the summary level data more quickly, and we'll have a broader set of stakeholders collaborating with us, as well as the toolkit that I mentioned. So complementary, and we are very well aware of each other's endeavors and work together where it makes the most sense to. Steve, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Naveen. And following on that, I think it's important to express that the vision for this Workbench Alliance is not to create the place for data collaboration, but a place for data collaboration that then works with other initiatives. So there was a question from a group that's working on COVID.IRT about collaboration that also mentioned the N3C initiative from NCATS, and then we also know the COVID data research database. So Andrew mentioned this at the beginning. There are a number of initiatives out there, and the goal is to help interface and collaborate with them in an effective way so we can build on each other's work and amplify each other's work rather than repeat each other's work. There might be opportunities where we need to repeat each other's work for validation in a coordinated way, and that actually could be really powerful from these efforts. But the idea is not to be one of creating only one initiative, but actually facilitating the interaction and the links between the ones that are ongoing.
Okay, so no, good question. Now we're now going to go to Zeljko Kraljevic, who it's a 5 safe question. So maybe invite and introduce Jerry Riley, who's CTO at Health Data Research UK, to answer the question. Can you expand on the 5 safes slightly? Does this mean pseudo-anonymized data? How do we ensure that a piece of data is really anonymous? So, Jerry, are you happy to pick that up?
Yeah, absolutely, Andrew. So great question, and it's at the heart of ensuring that we work with patient-level data in a safe and secure way. One of the reasons we've adopted the 5 safes model here is that all 5 elements of this matter, you can sort of consider them as 5 dials that you can adjust appropriately to secure the environment, and not really just view them as safe data without thinking about all the other elements. Yes, we will be looking at patient-level data being de-identified, but as was also mentioned within the presentation, we are looking at the analysis going to the data. So that de-identified data isn't leaving safe environments. It may be being analyzed in a distributed or federated way, or it may be centralized within the workbench, but at all points it's within an environment where we can control access, we can audit activity, and we have the safe outputs, such as was discussed in the video, through an airlock, so that any of the outputs can be analyzed by the lead for a driver project to make sure there's no linkage, no leakage. Yes, they are de-identified. As most people are aware, de-identification is not an exact science, which is why implementing the 5 elements of the 5 safe models is crucial for actually being able to provide a safe and auditably safe environment for this research. So that's the approach that's being taken here to ensure that we've got effective de-identification, but we have the other effective controls around this as well.
So great question, absolutely critical. Now we're going to move to the first question. So well done, Patrick, for asking the first question of the day. And it's about the focus of driver projects, because is it exclusively on clinical care, therapeutics, and trials? So, or is it about broader aspects of the pandemic? So what I might do, and this is testing the technology, is invite Aziz Sheikh. Aziz is director of the Breathe Hub, but is also helping to lead another driver project. So I don't know, Aziz, we're going to try and switch on your mic. So I'm hopeful we're going to broadcast you to the world. Can you maybe outline Driver Project 2 and your thoughts on it?
Oh, can you hear me okay, Andrew?
Oh, that's rather clear. That's good.
Okay, all right, great. So hi, everybody. Thanks for a great launch event. So really pleased to be part of this. So as Andrew says, I'm Aziz Sheikh. I have the privilege of being director of the HDR UK Breathe Hub, which focuses on respiratory data. So COVID is certainly within our patch, and been working very closely with Steve, Naveen and colleagues in putting together this work bench proposal. So Driver Project 2 is really all around the natural history of COVID-19. As Andrew says, there's still a lot that we do not understand. And so what we're interested in is really trying to identify opportunities that give us a window to intervene. So there's a very sort of close synergy between Driver Project 1 and 2. So what does that mean? We're interested in identifying risk factors for developing COVID-19, risk factors for poor outcomes, such as mortality, for example, also risk factors for the longer term effects of COVID. So thankfully, there are a number of people who are surviving the initial onslaught, but we know that there is quite a lot of morbidity in some of that population. We want to be able to understand that natural history, opportunities to intervene. So it's really thinking across the entire life course of COVID-19, identifying opportunities. I mean, I think our focus initially is certainly around therapeutic interventions, but I think we will also be open to non-pharmacological interventions as well in due course. Thanks,
Okay.
Andrew.
No, thanks. Naveen, anything to add to that?
I thought that was a beautiful expose from Aziz, so we'll leave it there.
Okay, now one of our principles is inclusivity. So an anonymous question: can an external international group lead a meta-analysis using the Alliance? Who will analyze the pooled data? An external group or the Alliance? What are the implications for authorship? So lots of questions there. I'll try to answer that one. The key to a trustworthy data ecosystem is, while subscribing to the 5 safe models, is to have a level playing field and a low barrier for entry. So we see the driver projects as a method to test the system, test the governance, the public engagement, the technology, the data standards. But success for us is to have hundreds, if not more, projects running under the aegis of the Alliance and using the workbench and its links with international trusted research environments within 12 months' time. So the answer to your question is that we would encourage international groups to join the Alliance, define research questions, identify collaborators, and then harness the data ecosystem in a trustworthy way. Authorship is always a thorny issue. Currently, I always insist I either don't appear at all or go in the middle, very easy position. But clearly, each project will need guidelines in terms of agreements up front on how data are used and attribution in a fair way. So we do really see this as an enabling environment to promote open science internationally. This is not a closed club, as it were. So I don't know, Naveen, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I was going to link it to another question that has come through the Q&A, which is, will there be some support and advice for researchers as they engage with the workbench? And the answer to that is yes. Certainly, we'll be creating some onboarding workshops where you can get a deeper sense of what's already available within the workbench. And we have our statistical team that's working with the Alliance describing what best practice might look like, so some guidance of some sort. Ultimately, while we enable the quality of the work, the results, the interpretation from within the data accessible through the workbench, that accountability resides with the research team. So you tell us what more we can do to enable you to do your work to the highest scientific standards. And we will do everything we can to put that into place.
Okay.
And then, and Andrew, I'll just add in one other piece as well, because Nicola and I have worked together on data sharing initiatives like this since starting with Ebola, actually. And so we've been through a number of these efforts, and we've heard oftentimes the concern, particularly from scientists and researchers from low and middle income countries, that the data that they develop and that they generate gets scooped up and is analyzed by others far away from them. And so really want to focus on the reciprocity issue here and make sure that people who generate the data are heavily involved and have control over how it's used, and to that point of attribution are fairly represented in the attribution of the work. And ideally, what we're hoping is that the flow of information will equally go in all directions, so that any region of the world can benefit from learning from data from any other region from which it's collected.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks. That's a very good question. So now let's dive deep into metadata, and I'd look to maybe Jerry and David to answer this one. Will you be adopting any metadata documentation standards for the workbench? And maybe Jerry, you can reflect some of the work you've been leading on in terms of the gateway development.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, and then I'll hand it to David as well. So with the Health Data Research Innovation Gateway, we have been working with some of the key data custodians across the UK, and some of the other members of the community are involved in metadata around the various modalities of health data data sets, to try and identify an approach building out from areas such as Dublin Core to have a not necessarily completely comprehensive, but a reasonably comprehensive specification for metadata, which we are continuing to evolve, and at some point we will take through a standardization effort that both describes sort of the key business level metadata and administrative level metadata, but also down to deep variable level metadata. So we've done some work here that I would hope that can be reused, because I don't think there's anything that we've done that is at all UK specific. So I'm hoping we can evolve that out further. So I think we've got some good starting points, but as a community, I think we've got to work together to make sure that's fit for purpose for this program as well. So David, did you want to comment on the approach you've taken so far with the Workbench?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm just kind of echoing Jerry's sort of comments there. I mean, I think the sort of work towards standardization is a journey there. So we've adopted quite a lot of the W3C standards that are evolving here, but there clearly is still work to do, and it's such an important area because it kind of touches on some of the other questions that have come up around sort of other initiatives and other data that exist sort of all over the world. You know, when we think about how we try to sort of federate and get access to the sort of richest data that's available, we know there are sort of governance, you know, challenges around that. So the metadata becomes a real sort of unlocking key to this, to see, you know, is the content and is the data that exists in other repositories really going to be useful for my driver project? And that is the long pole in the tent, I think we've all found over the years on this. So continuing work to make the, you know, the metadata search and the metadata quality across all kind of business and technical domains is really important. So I think the W3C sort of standards there are key. I also think bringing this into a sort of open source environment is really key, because this is a big community effort. So I think we've got some good positive steps.
And can I just flag the work from the Global Alliance for Genomics Health, who I think have been really trailblazing in terms of the spirit of developing open standards, tools, pipelines that can be deployed. And I know that, you know, we subscribe to you know, harnessing those wherever possible. And we're delighted. I think Peter Goodhand's on the call. I don't know if Peter, if he's able to make a comment, Fran, I don't know if we can do that. But you know, a lot of learning from the Global Alliance for Genomic Health. So that would be an additional comment. So one for Steve, maybe, while we try and maybe unlock Peter, if you know what I mean. Fergus, I get it, what you want this project is to outlast the current crisis, but what does success look like? In other words, how would you know you've done an unbelievably good job? So maybe ask Steve that. What would make you wake up in the morning and say, we've done an unbelievably good job?
Well, I think to the point that Andrew mentioned, there's two main things. One, if in 12 months we actually have a large number of questions, driver questions that are being addressed by communities in parallel, that we're able to facilitate the access to data and facilitate the analysis and the answering, that will be a very strong success metric in my mind. And then secondarily, very specific examples of where bringing data together that otherwise would have not been connected could have answered a question that was otherwise unanswerable. One of the challenges that we're all very aware of is that in the exuberance to work on research and the projects that got started globally, many of the clinical trials, for instance, that are up and running are likely not to be able to fulfill their enrollment criteria. And so therefore they're partially completed efforts. So to the extent that we can pull the data together in some way that actually gains value out of their insights would be tremendous. I think also to be able to start to create new ways to explore combining data that the scientific community and importantly the public gain confidence in as analysis techniques to learn for future pandemics, I think would be helpful. You heard a little bit of discussion around virtual or you know, synthetic data. There could be opportunities for us to advance the science of connecting data in this effort as well, and I think that would be a third benefit if we could come forward. But I think two primary would be that we have a robust community that are using this workbench and are part of the alliance in this ecosystem to address these problems in parallel. And secondarily, that we can identify a number of projects that otherwise couldn't have been addressed if it wasn't for the facilitation of combining data.
Great. Okay, now thanks, Steve. So I'm now going to see if Peter Goodhand is. Oh, Peter.
Yes.
So you're a bit of a veteran of alliances. So it'd be interesting to get your sense of the importance of developing in the open in terms of tools, but also any general thoughts and advice you have for us.
Well, just generally, I think you're absolutely on the right path, and this balance between a light touch for a global or an international alliance and creating the enablers, and then allowing driver projects and people to work within it. So we originally called it a tool. We were producing a toolbox, but I actually prefer your workbench analysis because the toolbox always felt a little bit too packaged, whereas a workbench seems like the right analogy. So just as you borrowed a few things from us, you don't be surprised if we start to
You're welcome.
workbench. And so I think the key then is making sure that the Alliance is flying at the right altitude, and you know, the 30,000 feet, the 60,000 feet. But we probably moved on from that and said it's not about what height are we flying, it's more about who's doing international route planning and who's doing air traffic control. And so if the Alliance can play those kind of functions and leave the actual research to the groups that have got these specific interests, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of human work to keep the dialogue going, keep the connections. And really, the other thing, you said it, several of you said it right off the top. It's about building a community of trust. And if you've got that, then things can move quickly. If not, unfortunately, we'll have missed a huge opportunity to get ahead of COVID rather than be constantly chasing it. So we will do everything we can, Andrew, as you know, from myself, from Ewan and others. We're working with groups like PHAGE, with IHCC, with ICDA. We put all of those communities together. We've got potentially millions of human genomes, and now we can see what can we do beyond those human genomes. How can we make sense of them in this context? So I would use us for Global Alliance and use us to bring in those other groups as needed.
Okay, thanks, Peter. No, that's some key messages. And you know, personally, I do see this as enabling, amplifying, and augmenting you know, the research community internationally, and basically trying to make people's lives easier in terms of getting to the answer quicker and in a smarter way. So, okay, we've got a great question here from Chifundo Kanjala, who is a technical lead for a project looking at health and demographic surveillance systems in Africa, initially focused on HIV, but pivoting to COVID-19. How do we work collaboratively to avoid duplication of effort? So Julia, I don't know if you would like to answer that one. I think we've lost Julia. She's maybe having internet challenges. Nicola, do you want to answer that one?
We would love to work with you. It's a fantastic question. I think really the best thing to say is, yes, please, let's talk further and think what would make most sense, and we'll be in touch after. Great, short and sweet answer.
So,
I'm back at then.
Okay.
Yeah, and Andrew, maybe I'll also just say, I mean, one of the things I think is important that question illustrates is that the group of people that are here getting the Alliance off the ground, and to you know, related to what Peter Goodhound said, I do not presume to have all the ideas of the questions. So what you just described is actually could be potentially a great driver question that becomes driver question 4. And so that's exactly the kind of initiative we would love, is to reach out, think about the question you're trying to address. How can we help facilitate the access of data that would inform that question, and then support that effort as it goes forward? So that's one way that we hope to not be duplicative. The other is also to be public and open, so that you'd be able to find out the questions that we are working on you know, at any time, and hopefully also some level of progress, so that people can figure out which ones might be useful to get engaged with and which ones that they can add on to from their own research.
Okay, so we're coming up to 10 to 5 British Summer Time. So 2 or 3 more questions, I think. They're still flowing in. One from Paula, and this is targeted towards open science. Will you require open protocols and statistical analysis plans for all proposed analyses of data sets to try and improve research quality and reduce potential publication biases? So maybe one for Naveen in terms of, you know, how we embrace GitHub and developing and analyzing in the open.
Yeah, so quality of the answers we generate is obviously really critical. We can have this wonderful, sophisticated data framework and then fail in that last mile in terms of providing reliable answers. So I think, Paula, definitely we're going to be looking for transparency, because transparency enables sharing. Sharing enables better and other ideas to come forth and helps other researchers worldwide focus their efforts. So not only on the protocol and the research question being pursued along with the analysis plan, but also in sharing of the results and how reliable they might be, we're going to have a focus on that area. Now, I will say we haven't fully developed all of our thinking. As Steve says, we don't pretend to have all the answers. So if you have any concrete suggestions or thoughts or ideas you want to send our way, please, we would be very appreciative of that.
Okay, yeah, and how you do that in a way that's scalable and durable would be so. Paula, please do get in touch. And now a question from Afshin Behesti, you're clearly very busy, Afshin, because you're co-leading the COVID-19 international research team with 200 international scientists, and also with close collaborations with the N3C COVID group. So please let me know if there might be an interest in future discussions and to discuss potential future collaborations. So I think that sounds absolutely terrific. So Julia, one for you.
Absolutely.
So, okay. We'll have two more questions if folk are content with that. Is there an opportunity for analytics providers to bring their own tools to the workbench? So David, do you want to cover that one?
Yeah, well, the short, simple answer is yes. Hopefully you saw in the video, the ability for sort of inbuilt tooling within the workspace to do some things that are, the 80% normal, but recognizing that there's a long tail of analysis techniques that kind of need to be used across the diversity of the driver projects. So we want to have freedom for people to bring their own code, their own scripts, their own pipelines, sort of licensed software products. So yes, we got a lot of experience on sort of how to integrate those effectively. So very happy to chat that through in detail.
Yeah, and I'll give this one to Jerry. Similar technology question: is there a way to expedite the onboarding of data by linking up existing trusted research environments? So that would be, for example, like the SAIL database that we work in partnership with. So Jerry.
So following this theme of short answers, yes, absolutely. We are keen to build on the existing infrastructure and environments out there. We are developing out from some of the work done previously around the ADDI project, a set of open APIs that will be available through open source. And we want to be able to use those as a way to rapidly integrate and onboard existing environments in a secure and standardized approach.
Okay, so thank you for that. And then perhaps sorry, we've not managed to get through them all, but I think we've had a pretty good innings. One for you, Nicola. Who will be approving requests to use the workbench, and what process will this go through? Governance, public engagement, etc. And will all applications made be in the public domain?
So to answer that second part first, yes, absolutely. In the interest of transparency, both the applications and the decisions on those applications and reasons for decisions, we hope would be in the public domain. As others have said, we don't have all the answers yet, and we're working through the processes, and also wanting to join up with others who already have existing governance mechanisms. And in some cases, local owners will still be making their own decisions rather than delegating them centrally. But the central mechanism will be light touch. It will be looking both at the research proposal and the users of the data, and absolutely, I really hope we will be able to involve public in those decisions in some way. But watch this space and do, again, the more we can share learning and work together to design systems that work for everyone, the better.
Okay, and maybe a final question for maybe Steve. This is a great initiative. Thank you. Can you advise what the funding is currently being invested in and whether there'll be incremental funding to enable projects which map and enable the goals of this program? So Steve, sorry to bring up the financials.
No, that's fine. So we've started off the funding to actually get the initiative off the ground and to really build momentum around the capabilities that HDR UK and Iridia are bringing forward to get the platform going and operating. As it goes forward, we're exploring a number of different options with funding partners to help continue to facilitate the use of the platform and to have a successful continued interaction with it. One option to consider is something similar to the Grand Challenges, which we've been a big part of, that could become a mechanism, a Grand Challenge-like mechanism that we could bring forward. But the intent is, as this gets successful and continues to build, that we would be using it as a way to actually bring in funding to help support analysis around questions that are important to the community at large.
Okay, so it's 3 minutes, so with the aim of finishing on time and being punctual, I think sadly we're going to have to stop the Q&A there. We will, however, collate all the questions and make those available. Daniel's just asked, will the materials from this kickoff event be shared? So the answer to that is yes to everything in terms of transparency. The deck will be shared. And the webcast, I think, will be available by Friday of this week. So because we want everything to be transparent and open. Thank you, everyone, for registering with this event. I know that on registration, you were invited to comment about how we might get in touch and learn from you as part of this evolving community. Just to emphasize, we don't have all the answers and we desperately need to learn internationally from folk across the 6 continents. So please do get in touch. Please do get involved. And by Friday, we will be posting the webinar plus the other associated materials. And if you've requested to stay in touch, we will be in touch within 2 weeks' time with next steps about how you can get involved across the work groups and, very importantly, as strategic partners or data partners of this alliance. So on behalf of all my colleagues, can I thank you all for signing up to this webinar. We will be in touch very soon. If you've got any ideas, please send them in as soon as you can. And thank you for all that you are doing in our quest to combat the ravages of COVID internationally. So to everyone, a huge thank you. And I'm sorry that we can't all migrate into a reception, but we will do that one day, hopefully. So a huge thank you. Have a good day wherever you are in the world. Thank you.